You're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour on the Vets on Media Network.
Good morning, Arizona, and welcome to our guests from around the globe. This is Joe Brett.
And David Lucier.
And you're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour. We have a wonderful show today. And before we introduce our guest, actually, he was David Lucier's commander in Vietnam. He was an A-team commander. Is that right?
Yes, he was. He was a Special Forces Green Beret captain.
Wow. So we have to find out what the A-team is. I've forgotten since I watched Caddyshack what the A-team was all about. But
well, the A stand for ass kicker.
I heard that, man. So Carl got the gopher and life goes on. So we're going to figure all that out. But we have some shows for us ahead of us in May and June. And we want to review some of the upcoming guests. Last week we had Joe Galloway, who was supposed to be on a call-in, and Joe had pneumonia and couldn't make it last week, but he's going to be with us next week.
He sure is. He's coming in first thing for our show, and you know, he travels a lot, and he's still a hard charger.
And he donates a lot of his time to the Army and to the grunts. I know he just spends a lot of time with grunts.
And he's going to spend an hour with us next
and that's
week.
Wonderful. So Joe Galloway, for those of you who don't know, wrote the book with We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and it turned into a wonderful movie, and it's a harrowing account of an actual battle, the first air assault into Vietnam, with the first air cav. But he'll be a great spokesperson, and he is a great spokesperson, but he'll be a wonderful guest for us. After that, we have Mark Van Hagen. Dr. Mark Van Hagen is a professor at ASU who runs the
Office of Military and Veterans Academic Engagement,
which is a long-winded name for get closer to the mic, he's telling you. I don't know what this, he caught a big fish. Get closer to the mic. Oh, yeah. Oh my God.
Get a little closer. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, Mark Van Hagen will be here. And Mark has been very generous to the Veterans Heritage Project. He runs this course, and actually that's how we got Fahim Fazli. Fahim Fazli was our guest last week, and we had pre-recorded his show because he was at a book signing event at ASU. And Mark also testified before Congress regarding Ukraine and the importance of Ukraine, and he is an expert on Ukraine. And we will hear his insights onto what's happening in that part of the world. And then later on, we have a wonderful guy by the name of Zach Bazi, and Zach is going to call in from Kurdistan. Zach was a veteran who was in Iraq in the 2007. Gosh, isn't it funny? We're talking about wars that go on. You know, he was only there like in 2006 or so. So at any rate, he will be on calling in from Kurdistan, and he's has a company, a nonprofit called Tent Ed. And he and his volunteers construct tents, and they teach refugee kids from Erbil and all the battles.
Holds the classes right in the tents.
And holds the classes in the tent. And he's out of D.C., I believe. And but he's going to call in from Kurdistan, and he knows the Peshmerga.
Yep.
And so we're going to get an insight of what's happening in that part of the world. And then later on, we're going to have Dr. Rich Carmona.
Rich Carmona, who, again,
another Green Beret.
Special Forces Green Beret medic, and twice wounded, highly decorated, and then went on to be the 17th U.S. Surgeon General.
And so we're looking forward to having him on the show. And then we're going to have Dr. Sisley on.
Yes, Sue Sisley, talking about PTSD and her research into medical marijuana.
And so if you've been watching the CNN series Weeds, she is featured in that with Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and she is researching the use of marijuana for the treatment of PTSD along with another professor from Harvard. And one of our guests, David Fridovich, the 3-star general, another Green Beret.
Yep.
He's on his way to Israel, actually, and he's going to be speaking. He goes there periodically. That we have a wonderful relationship, I guess, at the clandestine level with Israelis. But he's going to ask on our behalf about medical marijuana being used by the Israeli forces, and that was Sanjay Gupta alluded to that on CNN.
He did.
So we got some great shows coming up, and we will post them on our Facebook. Hopefully, these guests also will have Twitter accounts. And we think we're keeping the talent pool of our guests is extremely high.
Absolutely.
And as you know, our motto on the show and our tagline is where military history meets the future of war. So we're having these people who have had significant experiences in the military, but are also, like our today's guest, are able to opine on the diplomatic and other efforts around the globe where we're playing, where the U.S. is still a key player. So let's go ahead, David, introduce your
absolutely.
boss.
Larry, are you on the line?
I am, David.
Fantastic. Well, we have Larry Kerr on the line. He was my Special Forces A-team commander as a young captain. I didn't think he was so young at the time, but 26, I believe, is what you were. Yes, Larry?
Yes, that's right. And we were all very young and didn't think we were.
We were soldiers once and young, Larry. That's the thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that something?
Well, what I'd like to do is maybe start things off, and we'll start at the beginning, Larry, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about your family background, where you were born and raised, how you came into the Army, and then, of course, what you did.
Well, I'm from Akron, Ohio, which is still home to my cousins, but I left at 17 and really have never gone back. My dad was a union steward in Goodyear Tire and Rubber. My mom worked in Goodyear Aircraft and made airplanes from World War II all the way through to the Korean War. I went to Miami of Ohio, down near Cincinnati, got part of the way through, and just things were not working out. I ended up joining the Army, enlisted in the end of 1963, and started basic just after New Year's of '64. So, you know, I come from a family. We're Scots Irish Hill people on both sides. And at a certain age, everybody joins up and, you know, does their 2 or 3 or 4 years. And that's what I thought I was doing back in '63. Of course, as we all remember, it turned out a little differently in terms of commitment. And I went to OCS in '65. Once I decided I, as much as possible, sort of wanted to be in control of a little bit of my world. You know, I was the number 2 graduate in my class, so I got to call officers' personnel a few days before graduation and tell them where I wanted to go. That was sort of the big prize for the top maybe 5 guys. And I said I wanted to go to the Special Forces, and there was a lot of kerfluffling on the end of the line. This is the summer of '65. And, you know, I had been in done some recon work in straight light units before I went to OCS, and so I thought I was just the guy. And they came back on the phone and very gently told me I didn't nearly have what was required at this point. Maybe when I grew up a little bit.
Wow.
So I want to tell you that 2.5 years later, when I called and told them I'd like to see if I was ready to go to Special Forces, this was after a tour at the 82nd in the Dominican Republic and a tour in Vietnam with 101st. They practically locked the door behind me so I couldn't get out because things that, you know, Special Forces was expanding tremendously, and you know we'd lost some people. So that's how I ended up working with you, David. That's the short story.
Wow, you were a platoon leader with the 82nd, and then with the 101st.
And did the same work with the 101st.
Gosh, were you in the Ashall Valley by any chance?
No, that happened after I left. We were mostly in the Central Highlands, places you'll remember, Dak To, Ben Het, and then on the coast at Phan Rang and Tuiwa. So it was just one brigade of the division at that point.
Well, I was just an aerial observer up on the DMZ. So the 82nd or the 101st was in the Ashall. We knew that was a horrible place. Wow, what a career! So here you get out of college, or before you're not even out of college, and so you go.
No, I'm about 2/3 of the way through. The Army sent me back in 1971, and I finished at the same school, Miami of Ohio.
What a great school that is.
Yeah, and what happened was at the end of 10 years, I had become a regular officer. I got a regular commission, and at the time seemed pretty safe from the rift that was going on. But I was married by then, had a couple of kids. And I looked at my future, and what I saw was that what I'd been for 8 of the 10 years I was in the Army had been with troops, had been soldiering that way. And as I looked ahead, I knew that maybe if I were really first rate, I'd get to be a battalion commander for 18 months in the next 10, 12 years. And that's
And that was the end of your troop level.
The Army changed, and so I got out.
So, but you went from out of college, you quit school in the Army as an enlisted man, up OCS, and then airborne school, Ranger school, and then deployed to the Dominican and then to Vietnam. I mean, that's almost like a mythological journey from leaving the nest into this world that you chose. I mean, that's quite an achievement. Not less than 1% of the people that I know or of the world probably could ever have done something like that.
Well, I think lots of people could have done it. It just happened that I did it. But
yeah, how is it
high school at the end of my working life? I'm about 80% retired now. But I taught high school, and one of the things I taught was about Richard Lionheart. And at 15, they told him he probably wasn't going to live out the year because his uncles all wanted to kill him. And at 16, he was a great war leader. Well, you would say, how many 16-year-olds could be great war leaders? Well, maybe if your life depends on it, who knows? So,
well, you put into the situation. The situation makes the man, maybe, huh? That's
exactly that.
And when you came to the you came to the Pontoon Mike Force as a young captain, and you had some combat experience behind you, but how did that compare with working with Big Green?
Can you guys explain what a Mike Force is and an A-team? My wife is there taking notes, and she's going to criticize me because she says there's a lot of people out there who don't know what you guys are talking about sometimes. So what's an A-team? What's a Mike Force?
Let me try this because I'm starting to write a book about the Mike Force, and I've been giving a great deal of thought of how to describe it. So let's give it a shot.
Sure.
First, an A-team is the sort of lowest level of operational unit in the Special Forces. 12 to 13, depending on the time, non-commissioned officers and officers. And it's sort of the operational unit of the Army Special Forces. At one point during the Vietnam War, Special Forces teams established bases all along the borders with Cambodia, between Vietnam and Cambodia and Vietnam and Laos, to provide early warning and to keep the enemy off its game a little bit and to be a thorn in their side in the border areas. And these camps were made up of what were called Camp Strike Force, mostly Montagnard, but in the south, Cambodians. And so the mountain peoples of the country manned these with their families and ran from 200 to as many as 400 or 500 camp strikers with an American team and a Vietnamese team. How much the role that the Vietnamese team played depended very much on their leadership, and it varied wildly from none to an important role. What we found out in the mid-60s was that if our camps got in trouble, and they did, and often, it wasn't automatic that somebody was going to come save them. And so the 5th Group, the Special Forces Group, the headquarters in Nha Trang, decided to have these Mike Forces, mobile strike forces, where the Mike came from, and have these, we'd save ourselves. We'd have some, by Special Forces terms at the time, elite battalions who could come in, whether they parachuted in or came in by a helicopter, whatever, come in and save the camps. And that was the business through most of the war. Later, right towards 1970 or so, the American forces were not allowed to go get in trouble. They were supposed to stay back. And frankly, we got used to go start trouble and then have somebody save us towards the very end. But that was a role at the end of the game in Vietnam. Mostly it was about being sent to camps under siege, breaking the siege, and saving the day, we hoped.
Wow.
And
Did I get that right, David?
Yeah, in some cases, retaking those camps that the NVA had taken.
Exactly.
Duklap, I think in August of '68 was a great example. Well, there were several, but there were several camps that were, either had been totally overrun or just on the verge. I mean, they had a very small contingent of Americans and Montagnard personnel who'd survived and huddled in at the top of the hill or a command bunker, and were basically waiting for the end until the Mike Force came in, retook the camp, and drove the NBA out.
Now,
Duklap would be an excellent example of that in the Central Highlands, some 12 kilometers from the from the border with Cambodia, and it was built on two hills, and one of the hills belonged to the North Vietnamese Army, and the other one still belonged to the Camp Force Strikers and the Special Forces team there. So when the Mike forces landed, several battalions, they did have to take away the entrenched positions from the NVA on one of the hills.
Up where I was, it was we flew over a place called Mylock, which was the 5th had a place there, and I never landed there. It was all hairy, but man, it was out in the middle of nowhere, and I couldn't imagine staying out there. It was just, and Project Delta came into some situations. How do you differentiate what you guys did? Delta seemed to be inserted into hotspots in Vietnam. They were off somewhere, and then they went when there was something hot, they would insert themselves or be inserted. Can you get into that a little bit?
Well, we weren't supposed to know very much about it. Delta was a very highly classified operation, but mostly, it's now been cleared to talk about. They went across the border. That's what they did through most of the war. At the very end, there was a little bit in country, but they launched and went across the border, and they did reconnaissance, and they did bomb damage assessments, and they kept eyes on the Ho Chi Minh Trail and saw what was going up and down there. Took prisoners, snatches for interrogation purposes, for intel purposes, and sometimes went on direct action. There's somebody that or something that needed shot, and that's what they did. They're absolutely first-rate men, highly trained, small teams, and some legendary figures coming out of that.
Oh, all of you guys. So those of us that weren't Special Forces, we looked at the Green Berets. We idolized you guys then and now.
So we're coming up. We've got a couple of minutes left. 3 minutes left is what the Birdman is telling us. I think what I'd like to do, Larry, maybe next as we move forward is talk a little bit about what you did after the Army. And
what hotspots did you work in that we can talk about? That are still hot.
Yeah, but you went.
Well, I was in the Republic of Georgia, on the Black Sea in the south of Russia, and that was we had active civil war was just wrapping up by the time I got there. The last time I was there, I guess this was probably 2008 or so. You could hear the artillery fire in the distance from the capital, so that qualifies as a hot spot. And when we were in Guatemala early in the 80s, my wife and I, there was a coup the day she arrived. I got there a week later, and there was a civil war wrapping up there that took tens of thousands of lives, and there were some parts of the country that were just as much no man's land as anywhere on the planet. Knowing something about soldiering was not such a rare thing in the Foreign Service, let's say in the 50s, 60s. But by the 70s, there just weren't a lot of us who knew the difference between an armored personnel carrier and a main battle tank, much less left face from right face. So
sure.
It had its benefits, being, as one colleague described me, a burnt-out Vietnam vet. But having had experience in that kind of world was something that was very useful to Uncle Sam by the 80s.
So after, how did, and I think we're getting close here now, but when we come back, why don't we talk about how you went into the Foreign Service and, basically where you were stationed and what your job was, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, you're listening to Vets on Media. And by the way, our Birdman here was attached to the 5th Special Forces Group, and he was in Iraq. So we'll be right back. You're listening to Vets on Media.
Everyone's going to need an attorney at some point in their life. I'm no different. Hey, everyone, it's James from Vets On. Whether it was my last will and testament before deployment or my ongoing custody battle for my children during my divorce, I needed help, so I lawyered up. If you need help, I urge you to contact Capstrom Law Firm. Capstrom Law Firm in Springfield, Missouri services clients throughout the state in criminal law, personal injury, and family law. With over 13 years practicing law, Tom Capstrom understands both law and court procedures and how stressful they can be. Let Tom Capstrom Law Firm and his dedicated staff take the stress and worry out of a difficult situation by calling him today. We feel so strong about the work that Tom and his staff are doing that he'll be a monthly guest on the show. Tom is a veteran and a listener, for God's sake, so you know the guy is solid and will fight for you. Give Tom a call today by calling 417-864-0552 or email Tom at capstromlaw.com. And don't forget to tell him that Vets On sent you.
The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely upon advertising.
If you or someone you know is looking for a new job or career, you need to visit the pros. National Career Fairs at ncfairs.com. National Career Fairs hosts over 300 career fairs a year nationwide. The events are free and give you the perfect chance to meet some of the top employers in your area face-to-face. To find the nearest career fair to you, visit ncfairs.com. Again, that's ncfairs.com. What are you waiting for?
Veterans served us, now it's time we serve them. As a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as a current military member deployed abroad, I would like to take a minute of your time to tell you about Patriot Hills of New York. Patriot Hills of New York is a nonprofit organization providing support to veterans and their families. They partner veterans in need with over 65 health and wellness organizations, community groups, as well as philanthropic foundations providing no or low-cost services. They've helped over 400 veterans through confidential referral services, assistance with veterans issues, employment placement, as well as educational opportunities. If you need assistance or just want to help veterans by donating your time or services, contact them at info@patriothills.org. Again, that's info@patriothills.org. Visit patriothillsofnewyork.com for more information about their services or how you can donate. Our veterans deserve no less. We can give it to them, and you can help.
You're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour on the Vets On Media Network.
Hey, you're back with the Veterans Heritage Hour, and we have Larry Kerr on the line. He's David Lucier's former commanding officer in the Mike Force in Vietnam. He's Airborne, Ranger, and Green Beret. Larry, welcome back.
Thank you.
So you left the Army. What year was that? And then how did you then, get into the Foreign Service? Because that's not an easy jump.
Well, I got out in 1974, which finished up 10 years. And my wife and I, neither of us had exactly settled growing up and so forth. We decided we would try to have absolutely Aussie and Harriet American life. We
Sure.
didn't think of it in those terms, but a settled life. And so we ended up in Tucson. She taught high school. I worked for Merrill Lynch. And after a few years of this, we miss having, well, I guess it comes down to being of service. Of course, as a teacher, she was, but as a stockbroker, I didn't think I was doing very much for the world. And it got a little closed in Tucson. And so I took the examination for the Foreign Service, and it's a long process. Actually, it was longer because I had been abroad so much. Even though I was with the Army at the time, my security clearance took a year and a half. So, but then eventually got in. It was a little long in the tooth. I was in, I went in 1979, and so I was 36 when I went in. But we made a career of it. My wife joined the Foreign Service a year later, and she did mostly cultural work, cultural attaché, press attaché, this kind of work. And so that we could be assigned together, I just took a sort of whatever looked interesting approach to my career, but it worked out very well. I got to, we were successful. I got promoted by the end of this game to what was pretty much flag rank or senior executive service rank. We had a heck of a good time, did 25 years. My last 3 were at the National Defense University, so I thought that kind of tied my formal career in a nice bow, going back being with soldiers and sailors. And
one of our previous guests is a wonderful man by the name of Cap Dean, who USAID became the mayor of Baghdad and the governor of I think Anwar province or Baghdad province. Did you run across him in your life and time?
That does not ring a bell. You know, it's not a very big tribe, but it's really spread out.
Yeah. And were you part of the national? I know State Department has a national security team too. Were you part of that at all at any time? Intelligence gathering?
No, they have intelligence and research and intelligence. That's what happened when the OSS broke up. They gave at the end of World War II, they gave the Department of State an analytical part of it. This was during a period when we had no OSS and no CIA.
Sure.
So the analysis went over there, and there's still quite a bit of that in the State Department.
Huh.
So tell us a little bit about some of the exotic places you were stationed, Larry.
So you get in the State Department, and then you're sent where? Where did you and your wife go?
Well, we went to Mexico. I'd hoped for something more exotic, but there were things going on in northern Mexico. They're still going on right now. At the time, we went to Guadalajara, and that was just an 18-month tour to make sure they're going to keep you pretty much. After that, went to Singapore, which was an exotic tour. For a time.
What year was that? What year was that, Larry?
This would be 1981.
That's a great city.
Yeah, it's just terrific. It was not quite what it is today, and I think more interesting because there was still an authentic old Chinatown there, and there were still boats in the river, and all of that's been cleaned out. It's a little more still fascinating, and the food's still great, but it's a little bit more polished and like Disneyland than it was.
I lived in Indonesia in 89, 90, and had to go in and out of Singapore, for the visa deal, right? Every 3 months I had to go in, and I loved Singapore. That was a great place.
It is, and it was a great place to have teenage kids too, because no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't get in trouble.
Yeah. Pretty strict environment there for everyone, and that makes it safe.
It really is, and I just think of my 16-year-old, tall blonde daughter who would walk down the streets, and all the thugs in the world might be there, but they were all running for high ground. Yeah, nobody wanted to be close to that kid.
Isn't that something? So then Singapore, that was a nice posting. What did your job consist of in Singapore?
Well, I did a couple of things, but mostly it was consular work, visas, and so forth. That was interesting because I met my first people from Afghanistan there. They were kind of a scary bunch. I don't know what they were doing in Singapore. I don't remember. The most interesting job I had in Singapore, though, because I was just sort of an ash and trash guy as a junior officer, but I helped debrief people coming out of Cambodia, most of them aid workers, but also Cambodians themselves. And that was interesting to see how, get some insight into Cambodia. My kid brother was a career non-commissioned officer intel guy, and he was there when we left Cambodia. And so I got to compare notes with him, which was also fun.
Were they fleeing Pol Pot by that time, or was that before?
Yeah, that was. They were just healing from that. Sure. Really, at that point, yeah.
What a mess.
Now, speaking of Southeast Asia, you had a trip or two back to Vietnam, did you not?
Yes, I was. I got the job as Vietnam desk officer, and this would have been in 1986, so 86, 88, and did work with the Bureau, the office that handled Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and got 4 trips back to Hanoi. Uncle Sam doesn't like to spend any extra money, so it was 28 hours to Bangkok and 2 hours of sleep, and then get on a plane and fly to Hanoi to negotiate. And they wonder why American diplomats are dumb. Even 30 hours with 2 hours sleep.
And they're just sleep deprived.
But that was interesting. I didn't get to Saigon or anywhere south, just to see Hanoi and Haiphong. That was all that was seen during that time. But it was interesting to meet the people we had fought against and to understand. I mean, Hanoi in those days, the best hotel was the Foreign Affairs Guest House. There are no proper hotels in the whole city. And I slept there in what they considered a great room, and I was on a straw mattress. And you had to admire people who, working from that economic base, were able to, to do what they did. Wow. But anyway, lots of interesting.
And this was 86. This was 1986.
This was 87. by the time I went
Wow.
over. Yeah.
So did you
And-
have conversations with the people that you fought against? Did you, I have met up with former adversaries and my friends had. What was your experience meeting your former enemies?
Well, the fellow who I led the delegation on the last trip over, and they had a new delegation leader as well. And so after I gave my opening statement, he was a guy probably 20 years older than I and had a face like a bag full of rocks and a nice smile. And he said, well, I see that you've read Secretary Schultz's speech. We were talking about prisoners of war and missing. And he said, you see, you've read it very carefully. And I said, well, I wrote it. And so he kind of laughed. Later, we went out on the patio, and he was smoking a cigarette, and he looked like Humphrey Bogart, but only 4'11". And I knew his background, of course, because that's what our people do for us, and he knew mine. And he had been in Hanoi leading the terrorist effort inside the city against the French, and then had gone to Saigon towards the end of the war with the Americans. And he knew that I, had soldiered on the American side. So he looked at me and he said, I understand you were a soldier. And I said, yes, I was. He took a deep puff and he said, interesting business, wasn't it? that was pretty much the conversation. And I had a minder there, a guy an academic who went around with me and had beautiful English and walked with me to keep me out of trouble, I guess, when we weren't in the negotiation room. And so at one point I said, Bao, how can you be so kind to me? So, how can you be so forgiving? We fought a war against each other. And he looked at me and he smiled. He said, why should I be angry? We won. So those, I guess, were, I'd also at the hospitals, because we were working with Fred Downs from the Veterans Affairs in support of helping them with prosthetics, and they would give us some help on some things, POW, MIA, especially that were important to us. So I went with Fred and a couple of ex-Army doctors who are distinguished orthopedic surgeons who came along too, and we looked at their hospitals. And so I saw a lot of guys that were still there from the war, missing body parts and trying to remake their lives. And I got a chance to talk to them, and they were bitter about the war. I mean, that this had happened to them, many of them. But they weren't, this didn't have a nationality. They said, we've been fighting since we can remember. So it was us or the Japanese or the French or somebody.
It's interesting. I'm Facebooking now some of people in Vietnam, some former soldiers and the soldiers' sons. And it's the Buddhism, I think, is it's like we won the war. They're so gracious. And they moved on. It was a war. It's not, to us, it was a war, not a country. To them, it seems that it was another time and another place. They've since gotten into this time and place, and they're on with their lives pretty much, it seems to me.
Yeah, I don't know what the geography has to do with it, whether it's because they're there and they had to get on, and why for so many of our friends, not the majority, but certainly a lot of people we know are having trouble leaving Vietnam, even though they physically left it in the 60s. Whereas the people who stayed there just seem to have moved forward.
Yeah, I met Bob Kerr, the Medal of Honor winner, Navy SEAL. I met him on a plane. We were in and out. When I was working over in that part in Central Eastern Europe, I met Bob, and I said, hey, I met a former enemy. He says, enemy? He says, man, I was in Vietnam and showing him my prosthetic. He had to, and he was taking on his leg, taking off and on his leg, and they were all marveling at it, and they're all joking about the leg and what could be done better. And he was with a bunch of amputees, and they loved each other. I mean, it was a bond. It was if there was no war, except I think the warrior shares this common experience that it's appreciative across nationalities. You appreciate the person in the uniform on the other side because he has done what you have done and what you've seen
I've got a quick story about that too. And I was had the opportunity to go back to Vietnam in the year 2000, and down towards the end of the trip I was in Saigon and waiting for my sister to come out of a bank, and we'd taken a Ciclo over there, and Ciclo driver finally, asked me my name and where I'm from. And then the questions were always, have you been here before? And the answer was, yeah. And he wanted to know what years. And I said, 68, 69. And he does one of these sort of look arounds, like somebody's listening or something. He goes, he says, 1968, 69. And then he rolls his pant leg up, and he's got a scar from the back of his knee all the way to his ankle. and this big jagged, the scar was just jagged. It was a mess, but functional. And his leg was functional. And he's got his pant leg up, and he looks around once again. He points to the big scar, and he goes, "American Bullet, 1973." With a big smile, and fortunately, I was in the clear. So
it's funny, Larry. Not funny. I mean, it's coincidental, obviously, that it's 40 years after the helicopter lifted off the rooftop of the embassy in Vietnam.
That's right. It certainly is.
And it's like it never. It's such a dim memory. There's the boys that point to Hawk. The 40th anniversary of D-Day. Here we are, the 40th anniversary of Vietnam, and there's not. Those of us who were there probably want to. We can't help but remember it. But certainly, there's no politician embracing this one.
Well, it's. I don't know. It's a memory that made us, in many ways. My generation, people, let's say under 80 and over 60, it sort of formed who we are. And whether you were in service and went away to war, or you struggle against the war, whatever it is, it's so critical. But it doesn't have much. It doesn't have much eye appeal looking back on it.
No.
But
there was some glorious men, but there were few glorious moments.
As you say, I mean, it was. What I've found is I've gone around the world. I mean, when Vietnam has a global cultural impact. No matter where you were, what you were doing, whether you were in school or in the field or working, trying to raise a family. I mean, everybody was affected by that thing called Vietnam.
Yeah, and I have been recognized as traveling, and I'm sure you are. When you meet another veteran, I bet the former Soviet soldiers in Afghanistan, et cetera, and others. But when you would say you're a veteran, you're embraced. I didn't, by your enemies. I think there's a respect among veterans for each other's culture. Do you find that, Larry?
I think that's true. Also, I think that guys who have been further forward than others share on both sides the same disdain for people who are way back in the rear and who keep all the best jungle fatigues and jungle boots, and you have to go around stumbling around in the old stuff.
Yeah, isn't that something?
I think that works in every army and every time.
Is there a term for RIMP probably in every language, isn't there?
There's got to be. Yeah.
You would think, my friend, we got 3 minutes here. I have a dear friend who, from St. Bonaventure, he was a colonel in the Marine Corps, and George Connell, and he was a vice deputy commander of the Office of Naval Intelligence, and he was once asked, should we go? And I think this time it was going to Lebanon, right? Put the barracks in Lebanon of all places. Yeah. And he pointed over and he says, there's a Vietnam memorial here, you guys. I mean, we're supposed to learn from these mistakes, not to do stupid things like this before. And so you would think that after Vietnam, we would have learned not to do the very thing that has been done. It seems, we've been in 13 years of warfare now or more, and it looks like we're never going to stop. And it looks like our military is not achieving political ends like everybody had thought when they sent them in the first instance. It's kind of sad.
I've got a nephew who's done 6 tours and went away to Fort Rucker to teach something or another, and got, he's an infantry NCO. And he was out of it for a little while, got a family, and now he's back at it. And so this, and tour number 6.
Wow.
And, we still have just too many people who are eager for war, and we call them hawks, and that's supposed to sound dramatic, but it's if you haven't been, you ought to be a little bit more respectful of the experience than just talk about throwing troops a problem.
We have here, Larry, the Center for the Study of Warfare at ASU,
Arizona State University.
Arizona State University. And
for you global listeners.
For your global listeners, yes. But James Fallows, there was somebody quoting James Fallows who wrote an article in Esquire magazine several months ago. And anyway, said this is a chicken hawk nation, that there's a propensity to go to war by the military industrial complex, but they want someone else to fight it. So with that said, we'll be back in about 2 minutes with more from Larry Kerr, who's turned out to be an exceptional guest as David Lucer said he was. So thank you, Larry, for being with us. We'll be right back.
Okie doke.
Veterans served us, now it's time we serve them. As a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as a current military member deployed abroad, I would like to take a minute of your time to tell you about Patriot Hills of New York. Patriot Hills of New York is a nonprofit organization providing support to veterans and their families. They partner veterans in need with over 65 health and wellness organizations, community groups, as well as philanthropic foundations providing no or low-cost services. They've helped over 400 veterans through confidential referral services, assistance with veterans issues, employment placement, as well as educational opportunities. If you need assistance or just want to help veterans by donating your time or services, contact them at info@patriothills.org. Again, that's info@patriothills.org. Visit patriothillsofnewyork.com for more information about their services or how you can donate. Our veterans deserve no less. We can give it to them, and you can help. Everyone's going to need an attorney at some point in their life. I'm no different. Hey, everyone, it's James from Vets On. Whether it was my last will and testament before deployment or my ongoing custody battle for my children during my divorce, I needed help, so I lawyered up. If you need help, I urge you to contact Capstrom Law Firm. Capstrom Law Firm in Springfield, Missouri services clients throughout the state in criminal law, personal injury, and family law. With over 13 years practicing law, Tom Capstrom understands both law and court procedures and how stressful they can be. Let Tom Capstrom Law Firm and his dedicated staff take the stress and worry out of a difficult situation by calling him today. We feel so strong about the work that Tom and his staff are doing that he'll be a monthly guest on the show. Tom is a veteran and a listener, for God's sake, so you know the guy is solid and will fight for you. Give Tom a call today by calling 417-864-0552. or email Tom at capstromlaw.com. And don't forget to tell him that Vets On sent you.
The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely upon advertising.
If you or someone you know is looking for a new job or career, you need to visit the pros. National Career Fairs at ncfairs.com. National Career Fairs hosts over 300 career fairs a year nationwide. The events are free and give you the perfect chance to meet some of the top employers in your area face to face. To find the nearest career fair to you, visit ncfairs.com. Again, that's ncfairs.com. What are you waiting for?
You're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour on the Vets On Media Network.
Hey, you're back on Vets on Media, and this is the Veterans Heritage Hour. We have a great guest today, Larry Kerr. And Larry, in the time allotted to us, not allotted, but the time remaining, 12 minutes or so, we want to get your opinions. We download, these shows are on a podcast, and we have now, you'll be the 15th show probably.
Number 15 on the scorecard.
These will be downloaded at some point in time, we hope, for classroom use. And with your experience in combat and special forces and now in the State Department, give us your opinions of what you see happening. You're writing a book about your experiences. Give us some insight on what you're thinking and feeling about the world and the future and war, et cetera. So, Larry, take over.
Okay, well, first I should say that I'm really writing a book about the experiences of the several hundred men who made the Mike forces during that time, and it's really about them. And I don't think, other than the title page, there'll be a mention of Larry Kerr in this particular book. You know, I would like to be more hopeful than I am about where we're going. Mostly it's about politics. It's about someone saying aloud in the state of Washington, a politician, that Democrats weren't real Americans. And I just, as an example, and I think there's a feeling among Democrats that Republicans, you know, aren't real to America, true to American values as well. This cutting in half of the country is very, very disturbing, and as is the idea that you know, anybody out there has found truth and really understands exactly what's going on. I have been in school and in life engaged in, you know, the issues of where America goes, albeit not from the top of the heap, but I've been working on this for, you know, 50 years. And boy, I certainly don't have any found truth about what's next. And I'm concerned with so many people who seem to understand everything perfectly through the prism of their own political views, but, you know, don't do much homework on it.
Yeah, that's kind of scary. And it's almost as if you're not as patriotic as they are, and certainly your God is not as good as their God. That seems to be the other point.
Absolutely. That's certainly part of it. And I'm also, we went back to we talked just a few minutes ago about the chicken hawks, and that really is disturbing because it seems to me that's what is happening to our armed forces is that we are drawing from a more and more restricted group of people, and an awful lot of people from the inner cities, and an awful lot of people from the Great Plains, and a lot of hill people. Families like mine, and everybody in my family was a soldier. But my dad was in an army where everyone was a soldier.
Sure.
In a country that was at war. And now it just seems like there's a sort of a subclass of people who do this work. And I've heard our people, I've been in rooms with educated people who call our Army mercenaries because they draw salaries.
Sure.
So we are really getting a social separation that we don't deserve. And we have people who are sending our men and women off to war who really don't think of them as being part of the same socioeconomic structure that the decision makers are. I bet all that's scary.
I think it's pretty disgusting, for those of us who have witnessed the work that 10 years of soldiers in and out of Vietnam. I mean, they were all conscripted, but boy, they fought their hearts out because they had to, and to see that type of an attitude wasted on people who subcategorize them as some other cannon fodder, so to speak, that we'll just get another war, we'll throw these people at it, and then there's no VA, and there's not the cost of going to war and the care of the veterans afterwards is a concern of David and mine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was, one of the things I wanted to ask is, you've been, as you say, Larry, at various levels on the ladder, and what and we know some of the problems. What do you see as some of the solutions on into the future?
Well, when I was at the National Defense University, I would talk, was one of the teachers of a course in national security strategies, and we get all these tigers coming in, Army colonels, lieutenant colonels, naval captains, and commanders would come in, and they would do a national security study in the first weeks. And what they wanted was more ships, more airplanes, more tanks, more people, and a bigger budget.
Yeah.
And 10 months later, and then we study what makes national power for 10 months. And at the end of that, as sort of a graduation exercise, they do another national security study. And they want more money in education. They want more money in diplomacy. They want more money in infrastructure.
It was funny.
So that's a transformational. So there's somehow a big transformation from these warriors into more diplomatic.
Well, they just look at what makes national power. If you have to fight a war, what do you need? You need smart, well-educated people. You need an infrastructure that can produce the goods, that can produce the tanks and the airplanes when you need them.
Sure.
They just get a different idea what makes us powerful.
Sure.
And it's not about. Putin a couple of years ago said, "You can't treat us like we're not a great nation. We have the hydrogen bomb." Well, we don't want to be a country, I think, talk about the greatest nation on earth because we have the biggest defense budget. The things that made America great was not the Army.
Well,
It defended that, but it didn't make America great.
It's our ideals that make America great, and you cannot help but going behind the Iron Curtain, as I once did, and what photos were on the wall. Well, it was Che Guevara, of course, but there's John Lennon and the Beatles. That's the ideals that they were looking at.
It was interesting that Joe and I, a couple of months ago, had been to a symposium, a gathering, and the panel was made up of several generals and I think one Navy captain, but several
young Air Force brigadier.
Yeah, it was their take on the future of war.
To a bunch of ROTC cadets that we should.
And we just, Joe and I happened to be in the audience, and I was sitting there and elbowed Joe, and I looked up there, pointed at the panel. I said, there's nobody in this room that's ever won a war.
And of course, the Air Force General, his biggest plane was that you're having grandfathers who flew the same B-52 that their grandsons are now flying, and that's outrageous.
Oh, my goodness.
Right?
Yeah.
You can't have that, of course. The bombs don't know what airplane that's coming from, but boy, that young brigadier knew that B-52.
And as you say, they wanted more planes, more ships, and more people.
So at ASU, we're studying, Larry. This is interesting that one of the presenters at this forum is said that it's the military-industrial complex that's designing our weaponry, right? And these weapons, like the F-35 here in Luke and other, capital expenditures, are designed so the money goes through each congressional district where these products are being built. And so there's a big hue and cry to get these new deals out there, to get all the money going through Congress, and then the corporations, fund the politicians to get reelected. And all of this is going on. And David and I hope to have a voice, and Larry, you're adding to it, is that what about the guys? What about the people? What about, future veterans? After we've seen what our generation did, I think if veterans don't start speaking out, we want to make sure that future soldiers are going to be treated better than they have been to date. And I think that's the core of what we're here on this radio show for, Larry.
Well, I sat through our first couple of sessions on our talk today, just at my desk, looking out the window at the Puget Sound and feeling relaxed, talking about the war that I fought in. But now that we started talking about contemporary events, I find myself pacing back and forward, trying to not let the anger show in my voice. But I do find it just remarkable to hear a politician talk about the pressure he's under, or how difficult it is dealing with lobbyists in his district.
Yeah, that's hell, of course.
And how risky it is, a certain policy, how risky it is.
Yeah.
And then I just think, how does this guy or gal, but usually it's a guy, how does he justify being a national leader without thinking of the risk that these kids are taking? They're kids, I'm 72. These kids are taking right now on the ground. How does he look at this without thinking about the risks they run, the sacrifices they make? And how does he have the gall to talk about the risks that he's running?
And why don't we as a nation force him to look at that? One of our speakers on the show, Daniel Rothenberg, Daniel Rothenberg and Peter Bergen, who you know from CNN fame, are the co-directors of this center on the study of the future of war. Mm-hmm. And Daniel Rothenberg said, we got 3 minutes left here, but he said, what we ought to do, since there's no draft, that would put an end to this sending troops away. But he also said we ought to tax America. Listen, we're going to go to war with XYZ, in 2 days, and if we're going to do that, we're going to tax all of you $2,000. And then see how far that would go if we put it to a vote like that. Seriously. And he was serious. He that's an opinion. Serious. He was dead serious. I mean, dead serious is, what is the cost? So Larry, you're right on there. It's frustrating to us to see kids being put in harm's way without due process and without thinking about it. And then the sacrilege is not caring for them when they come home. How can you send them 4 and 5 times and then drop them and have the VA complicated by congressional fuddling and nonsense and corruption, the very lives that are so precious in the first instance turn out to be worthless in the back end. It's crazy. So I'm not upset at all, Larry. You can see that.
No, of course not.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well,
it's hard to be mature at this point.
It is, man, but we got to get but we'll be wearing our flags in our lapels. We get our flags for our lapels so no one can call us, weaseling socialistic communists here on Memorial Day.
Well, we're getting close to the end here. Real quickly before we wrap up, give us a little timeline on your book and your research earlier.
Well, of all things, I had to start back and just look at the whole Vietnam experience, and I started it with the French in the 17th century or something. And so I finished that. I did a lecture series around it, and so that was kind of helpful to help me get focused. And now I'm reading after action reports. And what I hope to do is either this winter or next spring to start interviews. I want to get as many of other people's words in the book as I can. Yep. I'd like to have this thing wrapped up in 3 years. I know that it takes me forever to do a 4,000 word article. So, I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'm hoping in 3 years it'll be finished.
Well, you know that I'm looking forward to making sure that you reflect me as being braver than I thought I was. So.
Yeah, he says that all the time, Larry. And that bean incident.
Look, I'm not trying to win a Pulitzer, David. Come on.
And that after-action report on the bean incident in 1969 up on the DMZ never happened. I don't know anything about it. Hey, listen, you've been a great guest, and thank you so much for being with us today. And we want to have you back. We have other guests like you who have been magnificent. And as this thing gets rolling, we want to hear your opinions on the next phases of what's going to happen next rollout. So, Larry, you've been wonderful. I understand, Larry, that you're a singer and you build boats and you write poetry and you're a writer. You're a Renaissance man, as David says that you're quite a guy. Is that all true?
It took me a long time to get that Hill Country 7 R's out of Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C., yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm working on it.
We'll be rooting for you, Larry, and we look forward to your book. And next week we'll have Joe Galloway as our guest, and he'll be calling in, I think, from D.C. Is that where he's living, Larry? North
Carolina.
North Carolina. Oh, is he around Bragg too?
He's there. I can't remember exactly where, but Fort Bragg's in the middle of it, so you can never be too far from it.
So Joe Galloway wrote the book, of course, with Colonel Hal Moore on We Were Soldiers Once and Young, but he's also, he covered the war between India and Pakistan. So he has a lot going.
He's the real deal.
He's a real deal. And so are you, Larry. And so is hopefully all of our listeners have benefited from today's conversation. And we look forward to seeing you next week and with Joe Galloway. And stay tuned, everybody. You're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour. We'll see you next Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Talk to you later, Daiwi.
Daiwi, man. How about that?
By the dawn's early light, what so